So this next section I call the importance of social nets. We will consider the importance of some different kinds of social nets. What do I mean by social net? I mean a network of people who are connected to each other in some measurable way. And I will give some examples soon. And their connection might not even be recognized by the people, or they might not understand all of the details or even the foundations of what is the social net, what's it for, why does it exist, and so on. Just to restate, previously we talked about what matters most and people being focused on discovering and staying clear and organized around what matters most to them. And then in other cases, groups might program others to neglect their self-interest and what matters most to those individuals, and instead impose on them ideals and values of a group, including obsessive attention to attracting social validation from others of any kind, any social validation, competing with each other for social validation constantly. So I want to present some basic, simple analogies that'll be really clear. They're not really going to trigger familiarity for people. This is kind of a gentle, maybe even fun presentation. And then eventually we'll get more into real-world specifics once we have like a clear, simple foundation. So with the following ideas, we can consider what are the distinct benefits and risks of social nets, as well as when are they most beneficial or most dangerous. How do we tell? We'll get to that later, but I'm just bringing that up as something to keep in mind in the background. So further, we will set a clear framework for us to later explore the actual social nets in which we may be operating or could operate by choice. For instance, special interest groups may promote the formation of specific kinds of social nets, such as a county of taxpayers or a state of taxpayers or a city limit of taxpayers in that limit, or a nation or whatever other group. But taxpayers is a really familiar social net, type of social net. The tax-paying public within a particular jurisdiction, a county, a state, whatever it may be. And the metaphors that I will mention in the near future will ease us in to precisely recognizing the purposes of the social programs that various special interest groups may use to organize their human resources. So here's my first metaphor. Imagine a group of people climbing a steep mountain slope together. Now, if they link themselves together with a rope or with a series of ropes, then what will the results of that be? Why might they want to do that? Why might they want to bind themselves together with that rope? Well, that could keep them close together, so they don't, say it's a snowstorm and they can't even see each other. Well, they'll at least know that there's something on the other end of that rope, even if they can't see the person ahead of them. They can't barely see right in front of their eyes because the blizzard's so bad. Well, then that rope will help them to know that there's someone ahead of them, and then they can feel anyone who's behind them. They'll be able to feel tugs on the rope if the rope gets tight, if it gets slack, if it's been tight and then gets loose. They'll be able to feel all that. So that's, in a low visibility condition, that would be really valuable. What about in general? Why do people use ropes to connect themselves to each other when they're doing mountain climbing? It's to promote safety. If one or two individuals stumble or slide, but then there's a bunch of other people who are all stably positioned on the mountain, then the people who fall, by being connected to the rest of the group, they're more likely to have a better opportunity of recovering. They're going to fall less quickly. They'll fall less far because at a certain point the rope may catch them, or the other people may catch them by way of those ropes that are tied around their waists or however they're fastened. So the well-being and safety of every individual in the group can be promoted by them tying these ropes to each other. But I mentioned a group of people climbing a steep mountain slope. Maybe if you haven't yet, visualize, maybe close your eyes and visualize. How many people do you imagine seeing that are then connected with the rope? Say it's a good visibility and you can see everybody in the group. How many people were in the group that you imagined? Was it less than 10? Was it less than 100? Was it less than 1 billion? What happens? What difference does the size of the group make? What happens when the size of the group of people who are climbing the mountain gets so large that each individual can't see how many people are even in the group? Even when, visibility is good, they're just too big of a group. Hundreds, thousands, millions, even a billion people all tied together climbing a mountain. Okay, maybe we should change the analogy to ants instead of people, but whatever. There's large groups and small groups. Even groups of just 2 people that counts as a group, or maybe you count 3 people as a group, whatever. But what difference does it make when there is a big group? Like, what if each individual is just 1 in 1,000? Then how much influence do they have on the whole group? If they're just 1 in 1,000, or 1 in 6 million, or 1 in 100,000, their individual interests, or their individual influence on the group may be very small, and their individual interests may not be a good match or a close fit with the actual momentum of the group, or the collective interests of the group might actually not be a good fit for their own personal interests. So with really large groups, there is also a unique danger. When large groups of people link themselves together and go to climb up a dangerous mountain, there's unique dangers when it's a really big group. First, it becomes difficult to change the momentum of the group, and I'll talk about that more in a moment. But I haven't mentioned yet the skill of the climbers. And if you have a lot of people together, they may think that, there's safety in numbers, so it's safe for us to climb this mountain together because we're tied to each other, and there's lots of us. Well, maybe that reduces the individual caution of each participant to such a point that it's common for 6,000 people within the group fall off the edge and take down the whole rest of the group with them. The entire rest of the group falls just because 6,000 of them fell. So I was making reference to the momentum of the group. When there's a really big group, and it doesn't, we're not talking about now falling off the edge of a cliff or something, just as they're ascending the mountain. When there's a really big group, it's hard to change the momentum of the group. If the group is moving at a very slow pace, individuals can't stop easily, but they can't stop very long, but they also cannot go much faster than the rest of the group. If the whole group's going slowly, individuals are going to be slowed down by that. And if they're all bound together with really strong ropes, then their range of motion is limited to the length of the rope, relative to the position of others in their social net, the other people that they're immediately connected to. There's a picture that I find interesting that shows a horse with its bridle in a rein, a little rope tied to a plastic chair that'd be very easy for the horse to move. But the horse might not know that. With the reins of horses, they can be draped over a piece of wood, the ropes, the reins, and the horse may think, I've been tied down. But they haven't been tied. They just think they've been tied. With baby elephants in circuses, they can be roped to a little stake in the ground, and they hammer the circus people hammer the stake in the ground, and the elephant tries to pull it out of the ground, but as a baby it can't do it. And then as an adult, the circus people still hammer that little stake into the ground, and the big adult elephant could easily pull it out, but they stopped trying years ago. So that's an issue there of perception, kind of presenting that out of sequence just because that's where I happen to put an image in my notes here. But what I had to say next is that I mentioned a rope. A rope can be tightly fixed. It might be that the ropes are just draped around each other and they're not really actually, producing any safety. People think, oh, I'm really safe because I'm in a group and we've all got ropes, but they haven't tied them in a way that actually produces safety. Or they might be, the basic thing I was talking about was the movement of the group. So if the group is moving slowly, people have to conform to the actual motion and direction of the group. So it's like they're a dog on a chain, except that their chain is not fixed to a specific location. Like I was giving the example of the elephant in the circus, and they're, tied to a stake in the ground, and they're fixed. They have a length of motion, like a radius around whatever that central point of where they're fixed to the ground, and they can move around that point whatever the length of their rope is or the length of their chain. But beyond that, they cannot move, and that's it. However, with the case of these large groups and social nets, we're actually forced to move in some cases, forced to climb up the mountain at the same pace they are. We can't go slower than them. We can't go faster than them. And we can't do a different direction than them. So in the case of social nets, the chains or the ropes that bind people wouldn't be stuck into the ground, but are stuck to the other people in the group. Or typically that's how social nets work. Or the social nets that I'm talking about, or that I will be talking about, work that way. So if the whole group is going fast, then the individual must also go fast. If the whole group is moving faster than the individual can make sense of, then they will experience disorientation and confusion. They will want to slow down. They will be exhausted. Eventually, they may close their eyes even to their surroundings and surrender to the flow of the mainstream. They're not even paying attention to where we're going or whatever. They're just trying to keep up. It's like they're just trying to keep up. Have you ever heard someone say something like that? Or have you ever said something like that? We're just struggling to keep up. We're just focused on keeping up. We're keeping up with what our own past momentum is and our own past, choices and our own past plans. Instead of reviewing their plans, people may just be trying to keep up. Or in some cases, they may actually be part of a real social network or a social net where they really do need to keep up with things, like in a production line or manufacturing business where they're producing stuff. If everything's moving really fast and everybody else is going fast, then you just have to keep up. It can be stressful. Obviously, if things are moving too slowly, that could be boring. But if things are moving too fast, that can reduce the quality. That can be very stressful. There can be more likelihood of animosity between the different people within the assembly line. They're blaming each other and so on. So for the most part, so far, I've focused on the issue of how many individuals are bound together in the group. I've also mentioned the speed that the group's traveling, as well as the direction and things like that. But what are some other issues that can make a difference? I did mention the radius, how far people can go. I'll mention that in a slightly different way, just the maximum distance the individuals can establish between each other based on the length of their rope. In the mountain climbing example, where there's an actual physical rope, they can't go any further than that rope, unless the length of that rope, unless they disconnect from the rest of the group or that particular other node within the network. Node, I assume you know what I mean by node. So if they don't connect that rope from that other part of the network, in some cases they may have one rope going in front of them and one rope going in back. So if they connect both of them, if they disconnect both of those ropes, then they're no longer connected to the group at all. So how far can an individual go? And an individual How far can an individual go without completely disconnecting from the social net? Is it a range that works for them? Or is it too far? Should they be given less of a leash? You've heard the term giving somebody enough rope to hang themselves, or giving themselves, so much leash, so much room that they get themselves into trouble. So how much freedom or how much discretion are they ready for? Are they able to be responsible for? How ready are they for self-determination, or how much self-determination are they ready for? I mentioned the thing about the possibility of disconnecting. If I've got a rope that connects me to someone in front and back, and then another one if I have two ropes, one connecting me to people in front of me and another connecting me to a person or people in back of me, is it possible for me to disconnect those ropes? In mountain climbers, in the case of mountain climbers, if we're not in the middle of a dangerous position, then generally it would be fine for me to say, hey, just so you know, I'm going to disconnect that for a second, and everybody be like, oh, okay, stay connected to one at least, and then, no big deal. Are you ready? You can ask, are you ready for me to disconnect that one just for a moment or for however long? So can people disconnect from within their social net? Do they even think of that possibility of unfastening from the social network? Do they know how to disconnect? If they do think of it, do they know how to do it? Are they good at doing it? Do they do it often? Is it a simple latch that everyone regularly uses to connect, reconnect, disconnect, reconnect again? If it's a latch that everybody's using, or a hook, or some very simple mechanical way of fastening to each other, and everybody's using it, and everybody helps each other use it. Oh yeah, I'll help you disconnect. You having trouble with that? I'll help you. Or a knot, whatever it may be they use to make sure that their social bonds are solid. Can they loosen them? Can they take them completely apart? Can they refasten them? Because if you don't know how to refasten it, you might not want to just start taking off, unfastening things or loosening things up. So every time that they get to a safe place that everybody is selecting to rest, or somebody says, somebody calls for a rest period, they may disconnect briefly. They actually might not need to disconnect, but maybe somebody, they get to their resting place. I'm just thinking of this, and somebody needs to use the restroom eventually. Somebody, you know what I mean by use the restroom? They're climbing a mountain, so there's no restroom really, but you know what I mean. Well, maybe they disconnect and go to some point where they aren't visually, where they're not easily seen by the other people in the group, or at least not by the entire group. So can they disconnect easily? Do they disconnect frequently? Can they reconnect easily and frequently, and so on? Or are they trapped for years, like in a chain gang, or by their own chain to a heavy ball, like you would see with prisoners? In many cases, people would be connected to an actual ball or ball and chain. And people use that as a joke metaphor for marriage sometimes, but there are real balls and chains, that prisoners or prisoners of war, criminal convicts or suspects would be held with. So they're bound to the ball and chain, so they can't get away. They can't run away. Other issues, other distinctions could be, what's the material used for binding the people together? We mentioned normal rope. If so, how well made is the rope? What are the properties of the rope? Is it a flexible material that can easily stretch and still remain strong? Or is it a heavy metal chain, like you would see in a caravan of slaves or prison inmates, a chain gang? Does the material tangle easily? Is there a need to occasionally take time to untangle it? And if there's a need to do that, how skilled are different people or different individuals at actually untangling it? Also, if there are only two people who link themselves together on purpose, consensually, mutually choosing to do so, then they might be able to easily communicate with each other. They know they're linked. They may choose to link to each other because they can communicate well, or at least reasonably well. They expect to be able to communicate well. So 2 people can communicate pretty easily with each other. However, with a large group, a very large group in particular, no one would be able to directly get the attention of all the others, not even by screaming or tugging on the rope. There'd just be too many people. You can get the attention of the people immediately connected to you, sure, but you can't. If it's 50,000 people in a stadium watching a football game, what's somebody going to do to get everybody else's attention? Start a fire, maybe? With 50,000, okay, 50,000 football stadium, maybe one person could get everyone's attention. What about 600 million people? And they're not all in a stadium together. They're spread out over a long period of time. 600 million people. Can one of them get the attention of every single other person very quickly, or at all? Probably not. So with huge groups, no one individual would be able to directly get the attention of all the others, not even by screaming or tugging on the rope or setting the rope on fire or whatever. It would take many individuals within the group to be able to get the attention of the entire group or the entire herd. So if you had, 50,000 people in a football stadium that were all, most of them are already being loud, then a lot of them together, maybe they take their clothes off and they're naked or something that's really unusual and, alarming to everyone. But usually the only way that someone would be able to get the attention of everyone all at once would be if they were an announcer connected to a public address system and loud speakers, and when they say, okay, we're going to have kickoff in 5 minutes, or we're going to start the game in 5 minutes, so everybody take your seats. If they've got the physical capacity to be heard by all those people, great. But generally, people don't have the capacity to be heard by everyone. There's only one person or a few people who can make those announcements over the public address system. So there's a real disparity of power that we find sometimes in large groups. Of course, there can be a disparity of power in small groups too, but in large groups you can have just a few people who have the ability to direct the attention of thousands of people instantly all at once, typically through words. So we're coming to our conclusion with this idea of mountain climbers, but not quite done yet. A final issue that I did not mention yet, that I will briefly run through a couple of these, is the weather in which the mountain climbers are climbing the mountain. For instance, are there lots of gusts of wind? If there are, do they need to, maybe intentionally make themselves closer to each other? Or do they intentionally need to use longer ropes or to allow a longer distance between the different connections? With mountain climbers, they would know, experienced mountain climbers would know, when do we shorten the connections, when do we lengthen the connections, and so on. Are there gusts of wind? If so, how strong? How frequent? Is there a storm, a thunderstorm, a snowstorm, clear skies? Is the sun intensely burning down on us? Is it dark? Can we not see? Is it hazy? All these different conditions. What's the temperature like? Are the slopes that we're climbing up, are they icy? What is the material of the slopes? Exactly what's the terrain like on the mountain? What is the path like? So that goes beyond the issue of just the weather, but you can there's so much richness and so much variety that we can bring to this metaphor. I want to actually insert this other strange idea. There's only one right way for a social network to form. I'm just going to throw that idea out there. There's only one right way for a social network to form. There's only one right form of social network. Yeah, I know that there's all these different weather conditions and all these different, small groups, large groups, but there's only one right way. What do you think of that idea? Does that sound like there's a lot of different ways that people form social nets. Isn't that because each of those different ways of forming social nets has some value to someone or to some group, to some individual? There's only one way to form a social net, or there's only one right form of social net. That's a really odd idea, really. So, in transition, we might even dare to raise the question of where are these mountain climbers going and why? Or where are the people within that social net heading? What's their target? And why is that? Why are they using the practices they're using? What is their target? Why is that their target? And so on. Just like, what's really going on? There are a variety of forms of social nets in which people are physically connected to each other, such as mountain climbers or chain gangs. So we know that. Chain gangs. And then there's cases where it's a social contract or a covenant or an agreement or a treaty by which people are collaborating and working together. In some cases of social nets, people could only participate in that particular net after volunteering, and perhaps they'd have to meet some requirements, pay some fees, pass some tests, bring some equipment. If you don't have certain equipment, you have to bring your own rope, whatever, then you can't participate in a particular social net, or someone wouldn't be able to participate without meeting certain requirements. In other cases, people may be born into their status within a social net. Again, I mentioned the example of taxpayers. Well, when people are born in a certain place, or if someone is born on a certain plantation as a slave, they're a slave. They didn't choose to be a slave. They didn't do anything to eventually become classified as a slave. They're a slave from the beginning, fundamentally, or that's one context. Or they're a taxpayer fundamentally from the beginning. They may not be paying taxes within the first few years of their lives, but they're viewed by the power structure as a future human resource, and then as a human resource, and then as a taxpayer. It could be that someone was viewed within that context. And I mentioned taxpayers. I'll go ahead in this video and make a side reference that you could have a group of people who threaten to do harm to all the businesses in their local area unless those businesses give a portion of their profits to the crime lords or to the gangsters or to the tax collectors. What's the difference between tax collectors and gangsters? Well, I'm not going to address that right now, but within this topic of social nets, we can see that there are definitely some significant similarities. People get colonized, and all of a sudden they were paying taxes to one group, and now there's another group saying, you also owe taxes to us. It doesn't matter what you paid last week to them. You owe us taxes now for this. Or we do accept, if you just paid taxes to them, okay, but in the future you have to pay taxes to us because we're the new mafia, or we're the new government, occupation government, or whatever it may be. So in general, the use of social nets or networks can be very beneficial, at least to the special interest groups that promote them. They can be, we're also going to expect that within a large group, it's going to be more beneficial to certain participants and less beneficial to others. There's going to be a redistribution of power constantly, and a redistribution of wealth. Also, it's very common within some social nets, at least, a constant redistribution of wealth from the tax-paying masses to the privileged beneficiaries. In many cases, just a corporate subsidy recipient, very select group of beneficiaries from a huge number of human resources or underwriters, funders, whatever we want to call that. So in general, the use of social nets or networks can be very beneficial, at least to the special interest groups that promote them, that form them, that keep them going, publicize them, encourage people to participate in them, and so on. However, in particular cases, using a specific social net might be less effective than just individual activity without any social net, or even a specific social net could be uniquely dangerous in some circumstances. So it would be better to have no participation within a group. Logically, we could also say if there are a variety of different forms of social nets that are available, then in any particular case, only one of them will be the most appropriate. And that might be very obvious, or that might be something that someone's interested in experimenting with and exploring. As an individual becomes a better mountain climber, what kind of changes might we expect in their social networking? They may wish to disconnect from a familiar social net and either climb on their own without connection to anyone in particular. Even if they're proximate to other people and talking to them, they might not actually bind a rope to them, at least not until they kind of see how skilled are those other people. Or they might find a network that is smaller and only includes climbers that they're confident in. It's like an elite group or a select group. They're at least above average or above what was familiar to them. They are within a certain range of skill at a minimum. Some amount of caution, some amount of experience, some amount of physical ability, some amount of visual perceptiveness. I happen to be wearing glasses, as you can see. Well, in some mountain climbing situations, someone wearing glasses, we would think that's probably a significant, risk. We would want to either bring them to the point where they have visual precision that doesn't require them to need glasses. We want to correct their vision, or else we'll exclude them from the group because we don't want them to always have to be looking for their glasses or help them find their glasses, or maybe their glasses get, ruined or broken or something. So we think an actual case where people are restricted based on vision is pilots. So military personnel who wish to become pilots have different standards than other military personnel. So pilots need to have good vision, and they need to go through tests to confirm they have good vision, or else they're not going to be reliable for properly guiding their planes and dropping their bombs and all of the things that are considered important with organized warfare. So someone might not be a very good mountain climber, and they might know they're not very good, but they might just be really cautious or skeptical about a particular social net within which they're currently participating. They might think the net that I'm currently connected to, or that person may think the net that they're currently connected to is unraveling, or could be spilling down the side of the mountain at a fast pace. I mentioned before, just with the big group, only 6,000 of them fall over the mountain, but they're tied to everybody else, and it brings down 1 million people or 50,000 people or whatever, just because 6,000 of them slid off the side. Well, instead of losing 6,000, 50,000 or 5 million or whatever collapse along with those people. And maybe those people were unskilled, maybe they were inattentive, maybe they were distracted. But the issue is, are they connected in a really, tight way? To have small groups that are tightly connected, and then they're loosely connected to other groups, like you have different counties, and then they're connected in a confederacy from which any of the counties can choose to secede at any time. That's a loose connection. In contrast, you have a case like where certain states within a political jurisdiction can't secede. If they choose to secede, they will get invaded and crushed militarily by the rest of the group. That doesn't really sound like freedom. That sounds more like I was talking about cases of plantations or slavery, where you have forced participation. Coercion is the foundation of the network. So with the case of governments and organized crime syndicates, coercion is very important, or it might be really the only thing that holds the social net together. We don't need to get further into that at this point. But sometimes there's an urgent priority for someone to disconnect from one social net or from more than one social nets. They may at least wonder, is it relevant to consider loosening, tightening, disconnecting, reconnecting, joining a new one, whatever. It's the kind of question that someone could explore. So what kind of social net is most attractive to you? in order for people to participate in a selective group, which qualifications do you think would be most relevant as restrictions on who could participate? Like this would be a group that would be ideal for you. What restrictions would be most attractive? What kind of social net would be most appealing? What would fit with your interests, your motivations, your purposes, your priorities, even your skills and qualifications? You know, how could you offer yourself to a social net in a way where they really valued you and everybody within the group was valuable to the rest of the group? If there were qualifications, how would those qualifications be reviewed? How would people be selected into membership? So those are just some questions that I want to pose and leave. There is a final section here, and it's a little discontinuous with the prior section, but it's actually part of the background reason of why I made all this content in the first place. What matters most to you? Well, your actual self-interests that matter most to you, your motivations, or maybe chasing social validation of any kind, whatever kind. Those could be things that are valuable to someone. Maybe, you know, demonstrating their loyalty to a particular social net. That could be a value. Like, I respect demonstrations of loyalty. There's a variety of different kinds of behavior that, when I say I respect demonstrations of loyalty, I may respect all kinds of behavior, but I value certain kinds of behavior over others. I value others. I value certain results more than others. So why did I bring all this up? Well, one thing that I'll mention in a moment is investments. Before I get into that, I want to generalize a bit. At a later time, we can explore the issue of what social nets may already bind you. How might you be able to reduce or discontinue involvement in them? What social nets might be attractive? How can you create them or find them that might exist already? We can explore completely releasing or slightly altering attachments to specific nets or networks. And once free of any tangles that might compromise our ability to focus clearly, to know what we value, to know what motivates us, to know what matters most, once we're free of any tangles or distractions that might compromise that ability, we could even explore the issue of what social nets would we like to participate in, forming new ones, joining old ones that we like just how they are, or reforming ones in which we're already linked, or maybe reforming ones that we might be attracted to joining. Now, I mentioned investments. We could also consider how can we use measurements of the herding behavior of humans to inform decisions about investing. This is a very short section, but again, it's kind of the point of all this. How can we use measurements of the herding behavior of humans to inform decisions about investing? Even if you're not currently active as an investor, this is short. Get the power of this. You'll need to be able to see the charts that I'm going to show here, but I'll stick them in at the end of the video. As a quick example, note the correlation shown in the below chart. Actually, it's just this one chart. Note the correlation in the chart pertaining to the stocks of a group of mining companies in the U.S. The last 4 years are shown. There's red lines, or there's a red line and a blue line. When the red line is low, indicating the least optimism about that group of mining companies and their future prices of those stock shares. When that red line is low and then it begins to rise, that consistently correlates to what? Can you see? To future increases in price, which is the blue line. I should have said that first if I didn't already. Red line is the amount of optimism. Blue line is the dollar price, US dollar pricing. So when the red line is high, showing the highest optimism, and then that red line begins to fall, then that correlates to the sharpest declines in price immediately thereafter. Now, what is my analysis of that? What does that mean? In other words, the most popular ideas about future stock prices, in this case of mining companies in the US, it could be about a lot of different kinds of investments. The most popular ideas tend to be consistently wrong. among the herds of investors. When optimism is highest, that is when there tends to be the greatest risk of a decline in price. When optimism is least, or when prices are the most discounted by the masses, then that tends to be the best opportunity for making a quick, safe profit, or possibly even long-term profits. So consensus is a reliable indicator of the maturation of a trend. So in investment trends, when a trend begins, not many people are participating in it. As the trend proceeds, it may reach a point of near consensus when almost everybody is participating in that trend, agreeing that that trend is a trend, making very optimistic forecasts about the future of that trend. When there is consensus about the future of a trend, that often is the period of greatest risk. That's often when reversals happen, because there's no other people left to shift from pessimism to optimism. Once virtually everyone has a consensus of optimism, there is no one left to change their mind and continue the movement of the trend. Of course, I have much more information about that for people who are interested. The background issue, what matters most to you? What matters most to you, or anything else? In regard to social nets, what are they? Why are they important, if they are? When would they be important? Which ones would be important? Are you climbing a mountain? If so, you probably want to, get involved in some social nets. If you're not climbing a mountain, you still may want to get involved in some social nets. You may want to get out of some and get into some. And that's really what the broader focus of all the next sequence of content will be. You can let me know if you're interested in this further. Thanks for your attention and time.